You're listening to an excerpt from my book, The Path is Everywhere, a guided journey into deep rest, the mystery of presence, and the forgotten places within. If you'd like to explore the full audio and receive the complete ebook, you can find that information in the description below. Chapter 1: The Union of Dark and Light, the full spectrum nature of love. In speaking recently with a friend, I was reminded of the great bias in modern culture toward the light and away from the darkness. When we encounter someone who is feeling down, empty, or flat, or otherwise not beaming, joyful, and overflowing with hope, we can quickly become convinced that something is wrong, that they're broken, and we must act urgently to fix them. And sitting in this field with another has an uncanny way of activating the same unresolved material within ourselves. For a moment, we question whether we are okay, as a sense of restlessness fills the space between us. The raw, shaky, claustrophobic feelings triggered in these moments usually remain outside conscious awareness, unless and until we cultivate the curiosity and openness required to explore them. Ordinarily, however, before we know it, we're scrambling to put the other person back together again, rushing to remind them of all the gifts in their life, imparting spiritual techniques and philosophies to provide a larger perspective, and admonishing them to get over it and focus on the positive, all in the attempt to convince them that everything will be better soon and it will all turn out okay. It's so natural to want to help another and to lessen their pain. And there's nothing wrong with this intention and employing whatever skillful means we have to bring relief, including sharing our own wisdom and experience. We need not shame or pathologize the movement toward reducing unwanted symptoms and disturbing emotions. But let us be sure to keep our eyes open. In the activity of prioritizing relief, we might recognize a subtle aggression in our insistence that the other come out of their immediate experience and into the one we believe they should be having instead, especially if that desired state will keep us out of some very vulnerable territory within ourselves. Even as we wish them peace instead of agitation, joy instead of heartbreak, or clarity instead of confusion, it is possible we're being called into deeper territory. There may be a profound wisdom in the symptoms, an important communication from psyche and from the heart, which is seeking safe passage in the intersubjective field between. In the spirit of open inquiry, we may discover how much of our fixing activity arises not from true compassion for the other, but from an unresolved relationship with the darkness within. Possibly the kindest thing we can offer our suffering friend is to sit in the charged energy with them, holding their experience and staying close, removing the burden that they come out of their pain, feel better, transform, or heal in order for us to stay near. This doesn't mean we don't deeply wish their suffering to end. Of course we do. But it does mean we are willing to slow down and cultivate a skillful, empathic awareness of what the situation truly calls for. To do so requires that we drop into the wisdom of the body, become more deeply rooted in the heart, and open to the non-conventional intelligence buried within their process. When we prioritize the urgency of relief over the slowness of presence, it's very easy to overlook the dark yet pregnant creativity and guidance that is seeking to emerge in ways they may not be able to articulate in a moment of pain and confusion. Their deepest longing may be to have their experience held rather than cured, to know that there is someone on this planet who can truly feel them as they are, and that they do not need to become someone else to maintain the connection. Someone who believes in them and the innate intelligence of their experience, who can model and mirror trust in the face of confusion, and is willing to stay with them as the wisdom unfolds. As we turn to embrace our own unmet disappointment, grief, and despair, we remove the burden from others to take care of this material on our behalf, which they cannot do, despite the most genuine, heartfelt intention on their part. Withdrawing this projection is an immense act of kindness that seeds the relational field with presence and compassion. As we learn to trust and rest in the innate wisdom contained in our present experience exactly as it is, we discern that love is a movement of the totality. It is whole, never partial, and is thundering and alive even in the darkness. And the core of the fear, sadness, grief, and despair, there is something real attempting to break through the dream of partiality. But what this is may never support our cultural and spiritual fantasies of a life of certainty, invulnerability, and permanent happy feelings. We can even begin to embrace the radical possibility that depression, anxiety, heartbreak, and rage are appropriate responses to a world that has forgotten, and to a person's embodied loss of meaning, purpose, connection. These responses are not pathological, but have their own purity and are valid expressions of psyche and heart. But we must reorganize our perception in order to attune to this level of unfolding intelligence. From the perspective of wholeness, every inner experience is worthy of our attention, ultimately workable, and a pathway back home into presence. From within this new orientation, which may be a bit disorienting at first, the idea of a particular feeling being an obstacle falls away and is replaced by a deepening curiosity to know ourselves at the most subtle levels. From the center of what you are, it is then seen that life is not only the joy and the sweetness. At times it will arrive seething out of the darkness to reorder the status quo and shake the very foundation of what you thought you knew to be true. In this surging of your inner family, the transformative nature of your experience will be revealed, and the portals to aliveness will appear as they are, infinite. The path is everywhere, even, especially, in the places where we least expect it. May you stay close to your suffering and the suffering of others, careful not to cut it too quickly, remaining curious and available to the wisdom as it unfolds in unanticipated ways. Before you rush to discard the disturbing symptoms, open to the full spectrum nature of love in all its forms. Turn toward it and finally see what it has to say. only love in disguise. What is the hidden part of ourselves we call the shadow? Those unwanted aspects of the personality that we spend so much time avoiding in the attempt to maintain the outward persona we have created. Many of us have come to intuit just how exhausting this self-maintenance project truly is, disowning and sequestering the darker and often more creative aspects of our personality while cultivating and leading with those parts we wish others to see and identify with us. Especially for those of us interested in things like spirituality and healing, we can see how much energy it requires to keep up the conditioned identities of the spiritual one, the wise one, the one who has figured something out, and the one who has transcended it all. And while much of this activity is natural and hardwired, many are discovering that this level of life management has a way of cutting into the sense of fresh, naked aliveness that they so profoundly long for. Throughout this book, when I use the words shadow, unwanted, or abandoned, I'm referring to those feelings, emotions, and parts of ourselves that we very intelligently disconnected, disassociated, and split off from in order to maintain the critical tie to the attachment figures around us. The shadow consists of all those aspects, both positive and negative, that we were not able to provide a home for as they arose in our experience and threatened our bonds with others, or otherwise led to a flooding of anxiety and dysregulating overwhelm in our sensitive brains and nervous systems. For example, if every time we felt sad and expressed this sadness, it resulted in anger and distance from dad or generated anxiety in mom, we learned very quickly that sadness was unsafe. If we were somehow able to disembody and place the sadness outside our awareness when it threatened to manifest, we could effectively avoid the rejection and untoward reactions from our environment. This developed capacity of dissociation kept us safe and as connected as possible to the care, attention, and affection we so critically needed as young children in our families of origin. But it simultaneously had the undesired effect of cutting us off from an important dimension of our experience, creating a split in our self-identity, and divided us against ourselves in ways that continue to produce suffering and struggle as adults. Over time, then, whenever sadness arises, a completely ordinary, valid, and normal occasion in the life of any human being, we engage in a variety of avoidance strategies to quarantine the sadness from our conscious experience, distance ourselves from it, and do whatever it takes to refrain from appearing sad to others. Because the experience of sadness, the expression of sadness, has become associated with aggression, rejection, or a flood of anxiety, we will usually unconsciously pretend we are not sad, shame ourselves if sadness arises, talk ourselves out of it, pontificate on how grateful we are instead, or engage in a variety of defensive behaviors to keep it at bay. Obviously, this is not the best recipe for healthy, mature intimacy and has a way of wreaking havoc in our interpersonal relationships. In developing these strategies, we were not getting rid of the sadness, but only burying it deeper into the unconscious, where it will become sure to leak out in a variety of less than conscious ways in the form of symptoms of all kinds, relational conflict, and a growing sense of unease, restlessness, disconnection, and fatigue. The flatness that many report may come from a lifetime of abandoning their inner experience and splitting off from parts of themselves that they associated early on with unworkable states of anxiety and dysregulation. If repressing and stuffing the sadness, or feel free to substitute whatever emotion was disallowed in your early environment, eliminated it at the deepest levels, this approach would be an expression of wisdom and skillful means. But the reality is that denying these aspects not only doesn't make them go away, but it keeps us organized around them, spinning around a central axis. We continue to remain in relationship with them, though in a way that is fragmented, and for the most part outside conscious awareness, where we are unable to integrate and make use of their underlying energy as fuel for our own healing and the healing of others. Many I speak with continue to wonder why they feel cut off from life, but can never quite pinpoint the cause. This ongoing chronic activity of dissociation is often the culprit. The remedy to this may be obvious, but requires ongoing work that is not easy. That of re-embodying, re-owning, working through and integrating what has been placed into the unconscious, and is one of the essential, non-negotiable practices on any mature path of awakening and healing. For each of us, there were certain features of our experience, feelings, emotions, ways of being, certain forms of creativity, spiritual longings, and so forth, that when embodied and expressed, led to the withdrawal of contact, mirroring and attunement from the caregiving field around us. As a result, when these disavowed aspects of our self-experience inevitably arose in our interactions with others, we became flooded with what felt like survival-level anxiety that we didn't have the capacity to digest. Rather than risk complete breakdown and fragmentation in our developing sense of self, we very intelligently disowned and sequestered this material outside awareness and into the unconscious, into that dimension of our psychic experience called the shadow. And in response to the anxiety that accompanied the shadow material, we brought forward a variety of defensive strategies in the attempt to care for ourselves and prevent the full-scale overwhelm that our inner disquiet foretold. It took a tremendous amount of energy and creativity to isolate this material outside our conscious awareness, a developmental capacity that most achieve around the ages of 4 or 5. And even though these strategies were critical in preserving the integrity of our sense of self, as well as, in some cases, our actual psychic or physical survival, they did not dissolve this material or heal it in any complete or ongoing way. We were able to manage it and keep it from overwhelming the psyche, but it remains active in an unconscious form, operating under the surface. It will continue to seek the light of conscious awareness until its reintegration, usually in less than conscious ways that get us into trouble and generate unnecessary suffering, struggle, and conflict for ourselves and others. We need only look to our intimate relationships as very vivid reminders of that which remains unresolved within us, owing to the power of intimacy to constellate this material and bring it into the here and now. Relationship might be seen as the royal road to the unconscious, a modern day temple and crucible in which split off, dissociated material may be most skillfully illuminated and worked through. Especially as we allow another to matter to us, let them into our hearts, and assume the risks that vulnerable, exposed, embodied intimacy always requires. We can count on this material to vividly present itself as it longs for holding and metabolization. As nearly all of our early wounding arose within interpersonal contexts, it makes sense that it will be most powerfully activated as well as untangled within a relational field. Many of us have experienced this, often the hard way, in our journeys as lovers, partners, parents, children, close friends, clients in therapy. We all know the experience of having someone we care about say something rather innocuous, or fail to respond right away or in the way we'd like, only to be flooded seconds later with unexplainable, seemingly irrational feelings of fear, rage, abandonment, rejection. The unwanted, then, are those archaic organizing beliefs and their associated bodily feelings and emotional conclusions that, when arising in the here and now, trigger a subtle or not so subtle outpouring of anxiety and sense of urgency. Things just do not feel safe. While on some level we may sense that our terror is not rational, this does very little to calm the storm. Something is happening in our bodies that is primal and not subject to logical analysis. In the language of neuroscience, the cool, relaxed, slow wisdom of the prefrontal cortex is hijacked by the urgent, irrational, speedy reactivity of the amygdala. It is clear we must respond, and we spin into motion, usually by way of seeking regulation through the ancient pathways of fight, flight, freeze. It is the undoing and the reorganization of these habitual pathways, seeding them with empathic, attuned, compassionate presence, that is one of the core essences of this work. Rather than turn toward the unmet, unknown, as it surges into conscious awareness, and confront with loving awareness the very shaky, restless, and claustrophobic energy that surrounds it, we move away, reenacting the young strategies and avoidant behaviors that were designed to return us to safe ground. The challenge, of course, is that by not directly and consciously working with this material as adults, with capacities we once did not possess, we keep it alive, burning within us until it is inevitably triggered yet again. We condition ourselves that it is still not workable, that staying with it will overwhelm us as it did at an earlier time, and that urgently seeking relief is our only option. It's as if we've stepped into a time machine and have returned to our lives as young children, doing whatever we must to put the fire out, even if it means abandoning and splitting off from ourselves, attacking our own self-integrity and practicing violence toward our own ripening vulnerability. And it is this chronic abandonment of ourselves over time that can lead to a variety of symptoms, such as anxiety, depression, flatness, and dissatisfaction of all kinds. This primordial discontent or core existential anguish is what the Buddha referred to in his first noble truth. The unwanted can take form as sadness, rage, loneliness, or shame, or as a deeply embedded sense of unworthiness, fear, rejection, abandonment. Without realizing how it came to be, we find ourselves convinced that something has gone terribly wrong, that we must resolve as soon as possible, lest we decompensate and lose touch with who we are. In these moments, a very powerful practice we can do is to slow down and to inquire carefully, what is it, above all else, that we simply do not want to feel? That if we were to allow in, would overwhelm us, take us out of our window of tolerance, and result in devastating and life-shattering consequences. We each have a certain feeling or family of feelings that have come to be associated with danger, overwhelm, and unworkable anxiety of all kinds. For example, you don't receive a text when your partner says she will text you. You receive some feedback about your performance at work that is obviously unfair. You get into a heated political or religious conversation that constellates profound feelings of rage. You're misunderstood or not seen as you are, critiqued and called out during an argument. Your partner bails instead of listening and processing a difficult situation. Someone questions your spiritual realization or calls you a fraud or questions your business ethics or says nasty things about someone you love. All of a sudden, it's as if you're 4 or 5 years old, back in your family of origin, fighting and fleeing to get out of the burning energy underneath it all. Anything to cut into the panic, groundlessness, and sense of impending danger. It's as if the walls are closing around you. It's getting claustrophobic and there are no means to escape. The invitation, of course, is first of all to breathe deeply, slow down and feel your feet on the ground. Soothe the shock to your nervous system in whatever way works best for you. Take a walk, go out in nature, call a friend, lay your hands on your heart, draw or paint, write in your journal, do some yoga, make yourself a nourishing meal. Once you've calmed a bit, you can slowly begin to invite the previously abandoned material back into your conscious experience, or you can work with it and begin the gradual process of training yourself to tolerate, contain, open into, and metabolize it with adult level capacities you did not have as a young child. This is not easy work. It's not usually going to feel immediately peaceful or blissful, and has a way of initiating all sorts of secondary feelings of unsafety, shame, abandonment, and unworthiness. It's often messy and uncomfortable, but you can do it 1 second at a time, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, then rest. You can descend underneath the swirling storyline for just a moment. You can return to that later for reauthoring from a more soothed, grounded place, and stay with what was once impossible to hold. Over time, as you train yourself to stay in this way, you may come to discover a certain freedom that is always present, even as you push yourself into uncomfortable territory. Like any muscle, the more you practice, the more the muscle of empathic attunement will grow and develop. And over time, it will become second nature and not require a lot of difficulty to engage. I never cease to be astonished at how those I have worked with have evolved this capacity over time. Not years, but weeks and months. Even those with the most profound, deeply embedded trauma and attachment wounding, the plasticity of the human brain and the courage of the human heart to seed new pathways or They're outrageous and truly awesome. The reality is that you need not abandon yourself any longer. You are worthy of care, holding, and attunement that perhaps that you didn't receive on your earlier developmental journey. While the template of self-abandonment and aggression toward your experience may be alive and well in your neural network, you can rewire and reorganize the pathways. It may seem impossible to stay with what feels unbearable, but slowly you can do it. But it does take practice, courage, curiosity, and the cultivating of radical new levels of kindness toward yourself. For many, this sort of self-care is completely foreign and was never modeled in their families of origin. But the good news is that it can be learned, and you can start exactly where you are. If you are sequestering important aspects of who you are, isolating them into the shadow and out of conscious holding awareness, you may always feel half alive, slightly flat, down, and not fully here, even if things are going relatively well in your life. The entirety of who and what you are is welcome in the miracle of the here and now. And it is only through a fully embodied and compassionate relationship with all of you that you can discover and embody the aliveness you so deeply long for. By doing this work over time, you can discover that the shadow, in some paradoxical way, is only love in disguise, come to reintroduce you to the field of space, warmth, and presence that you are. By turning back toward yourself, you lay a new pathway of empathic attunement, hold and metabolize the energies of the somatic and emotional worlds, and become available to yourself and other in wise and loving ways. An unexpected tour guide. So how do we make contact with the shadow, with those disowned aspects of ourselves that we have lost touch with along the way, or those more creative aspects that have not yet found the right conditions in which to emerge? At times, we may sense that the mislaid pieces of our psyche and soma are nearby, arising from within, or while other times it can feel as if they're coming at us from the outside as triggers, hooks, and psychosomatic symptoms of all kinds. They can come on display in the most unanticipated ways, leaving us feeling as if we were being attacked by an enemy force. As we practice turning back toward that which we've lost contact with, holding the orphaned ones of the somatic and emotional worlds, we come face to face with an unexpected truth that despite appearances to the contrary, the pieces and parts are hidden guides, filled with energy and information. Reorganizing our relationship with the inner family takes practice, as well as courage, patience, and curiosity. More than that, what may be most important is the willingness to become our own best friend and practice kindness toward whatever appears. Learning to befriend ourselves is a lost art and a capacity that is often overlooked or trivialized. Yes, it might sound trite, too simple, or a little like a spiritual cliche. However, in practice, it is a revolution. Opening our hearts to our suffering is not something most of us have been trained in, and it can feel impossible or even crazy to attempt. But within an environment of self-compassion, we can lay down a new pathway that will replace the habitual reenactment of an earlier environment of aggression, shame, misattunement. As I mentioned earlier, and will continue to reinforce, it is important that we cultivate the intention to become more interested in the truth of our experience than in our demand to find relief from our symptoms. It is natural to not want to feel pain, but if our primary concern is relief, we may not be able to allow ourselves to get close enough to the intelligence and creativity that are attempting to break through. As long as there is a subtle agenda to meet our experience because we believe it's the quickest way to eradicate and escape it, we subtly keep the neural pathways of aggression and misattunement alive, which will interfere with the slower, intimate, and kind encounter that is required. This is not a journey of perfection, but one of wholeness. We can count on these hidden agendas and dynamics to come into play as we do this work. Rather than shaming or judging ourselves for the resurgence of our protective strategies, we can use their appearance as mindfulness bells, as invitations into deeper inquiry. At some point on the path, you may even find yourself welcoming the opportunity to be triggered and activated by this ancient material, as it is no longer received as an enemy or obstacle, but as a dynamic harbinger of integration. We cannot, of course, pretend this is the case if it is not real for us, out of some sense that this would be a more evolved or spiritual response to the material. And we must always remain truthful and authentic as to our actual experience and capacities. Again, the goal is not perfection, but wholeness, genuineness, and an uncompromising commitment to what is most true. To engage with this work at the most profound and transformative levels, we must cultivate a deep love for what is most true now. Not what was true or what our teacher, therapist, partner, or friend believes is true, but what is most alive when we make direct contact with our experience exactly as it is. It can take some practice to discover this for ourselves, as the truth of our immediate experience will continue to deepen and become more subtle over time, as the journey of the heart itself is endless. We must descend underneath our conditioned history, knowing that the first responses in the form of thought and emotion are often learned and habitual. As we return over and over into the body and the felt sense of our experience, we'll be able to access these deeper and more subtle levels of information and guidance. The process of sequestering material into the shadow is most often discussed as a historical event that took place at some point in the past. But as we inquire into the moment-to-moment unfolding of our immediate experience, we discover that while our strategies of dissociation may have historical origins, they must actually be maintained in the present. This is often hard to allow in, the notion that we are somehow actively working to keep our defensive strategies alive. It's important to remember that this isn't something that we're doing consciously because we're bad or unspiritual or neurotic people. Rather than viewing this discovery as evidence of some sort of failure on our part, we can use it as fuel to know ourselves at deeper and deeper levels. It can be very liberating to discover that without this maintenance, that these strategies will fall away over time as they simply are no longer needed. From this perspective, healing is not so much a matter of letting go of unwanted material as it is of allowing it to let go of us when it is no longer necessary, to let it dissolve on its own. not from effort and struggle on our part, but out of the non-doing of no longer maintaining it in the present. Each time we deny or split off from unwanted aspects of ourselves, we reinforce the necessity of our avoidance strategies and keep them alive and operating in the background. From a historical perspective, these strategies emerged not because we were crazy, lost, or had fallen prey to some sort of personality disorder or psychotic break, but in order to protect us from an overwhelming onslaught of dysregulating cognitions, feelings, and sensations that we did not have the developmental capacity to tolerate, contain, metabolize. As adults, we have access to faculties we did not have in an earlier time. An opportunity has been given for us to turn back toward the displaced inner family and call the members back home. Until we're able to be in an attuned, mindful, and compassionate relationship with these parts, they will express themselves unconsciously as symptoms, conflict, feelings, dreams, fantasies, and the vivid display of the others that come into our lives. This expression seems to be non-negotiable, as this material does not simply pass away as a result of our choice to disembody from it. With respect to the journey of integration, it's important to note that the other refers not only to the other people in our lives, the so-called external other, but also the internal other, those aspects of ourselves that we have disconnected from. All of those unmet parts, partly felt emotions, and unprocessed feelings make up the internal other that we will at times be called to re-enter into relationship with. In a larger, more collective or spiritual sense, the great other is another level yet and may be perceived as the entirety of the phenomenal world itself, as an image of a god or goddess, or as seen and unseen messengers, symbols, visions, and archetypes that appear in countless forms, providing an endless stream of information and guidance for the journey ahead. But in order to consciously work with this level of other, our perception must be cleansed. This purification occurs by way of wisdom and inquiry on the one hand, and kindness, compassion, and surrender on the other. There are a number of ways to access this material and cultivate a present time relationship with it. One of the most provocative entryways is to ask yourself, who in your life triggers you the most? Who is it that just by being themselves pushes your buttons, catalyzes an eruption of emotion, annoys you, irritates you, leaves you fuming? Who more than anyone seems to have some secret power over you, shaking you to your core and throwing you off kilter just by a glance, a few words, or even the way they walk or carry themselves? Once you identify this person, you can then inquire carefully, slowly, and with a new sort of curiosity and self-kindness, and see what it is about them that hooks you so intensely. Specifically, what qualities in them activate and trigger that burning, claustrophobic, seething discomfort? What makes you want to run for the hills, reach out to attack, or curl up in the fetal position on the floor? Once you get a sense of what these characteristics are, and what beliefs, emotions, and feelings their expression brings alive in you, you can then explore how you may have disconnected from these same qualities in yourself. In what way have you lost contact with these aspects such that you were reminded in an unexpected way when they appear around you in the behavior of others? One of the really creative things about the psyche is that we tend to attract others into our lives who embody exactly those qualities that we have disowned in ourselves. How annoying. How amazing. This is very challenging territory that is often quite humbling to confront. This same process also works with those you most admire, become infatuated with, even envious of. Rather than get caught up in the surface personality of these people, you can ask what qualities they embody that you may have disowned in yourself. Maybe they are artistic, independent, or able to express healthy aggression, or are able to lead with their vulnerability in an admirable way. Or they're well-spoken, intelligent, humble, attractive, wise, kind, successful, or insightful. As you begin to home in on the qualities that activate you and draw you to the other, you can then explore the thoughts, emotions, and sensations that arise as you open to these dimensions in yourself. There are likely some very good reasons, some very intelligent, adaptive reasons why you chose to disconnect from these qualities, from those qualities in others that annoy or fascinate you. If in your family of origin you were met with misattunement, aggression, or anxiety in response to the expression of certain aspects of your developing personality, you learn to split off from these attributes in your best effort to take care of yourself. You're wired to do whatever it takes to hold on to and maintain whatever limited degree of affection, contact, and mirroring was available in a way that is both intelligent and creative. You cultivated aspects that were not necessarily native to you, while abandoning others in order to keep the tie alive. It was simply not an option to consciously choose to act in a way that might sever the connection. As I noted earlier, however, these abandoned qualities remain buried deep within you, in your body, your cell tissue, and your nervous system, and may not rest until you receive them back into conscious awareness. In other words, those qualities that repulse, trigger, or infatuate you represent parts you have deserted into the shadow, and that to this day you work creatively, though usually unconsciously, to keep out of awareness through avoidant activity of all kinds. When these unmet parts and pieces are triggered in a variety of unique relational configurations, which they inevitably will, your defensive strategies will kick in, resulting in a whole range of anxiety-related feelings and bodily sensations. From this perspective, the anxiety itself is a heads up, a mindfulness bell, that material you're usually able to keep unconscious is now threatening to erupt into conscious awareness. Not to work against you, but as an opportunity for integration. In this way, even the anxiety itself can be seen as a harbinger or a forerunner of the realization of wholeness. You can count on those in your life to relentlessly remind you of what you've disowned in yourself. While this may appear to be bad news, it offers a unique opportunity to reconnect with the lost parts and provide safe haven where they can reclaim their rightful place in the landscape of your inner family. In order to reframe the activation in this way, it's vital that you cultivate the intention to know what is true more than anything. More than feeling good, more than appearing spiritual, more than being untouchable, more than being happy all the time, and more than needing to keep up the appearance that you always have it together. You can make a commitment that each time you find yourself irritated, annoyed, triggered, enamored, or enchanted, you'll stay close. Sacred data and information are being presented that are ripe for your holding and attunement. A rich opportunity to befriend and take care of yourself in a radically new way. The invitation during these times is to move toward what is coming up so that it can be met. At first, for very short periods of time. Move toward and then rest. Move toward and then rest. Touch and go. Push yourself a bit, but not so much that you traumatize yourself or become fragmented or fall too far outside your window of tolerance. It can help to do this work with a trusted, attuned other who knows you well and is familiar with your core vulnerabilities and defensive organization, so they can help you dance in the middle, neither letting you off the hook prematurely nor falling into unproductive reenactments of shame, blame, self-aggression. Yes, it can be annoying, but these inner and outer others are your true teachers, pure wisdom guides sent from beyond to remind you of something important that you've forgotten. In this sense, they are unexpected tour guides into your true nature. And for this, they are worthy of honor and a few moments of your undivided, warm attention. There is never an end to the path of the heart. There is no final, safe landing place, no mythical fairy tale ending, no completion, no resolution, only endless unfolding. Your heart is endless. This concludes a selected chapter from my book, The Path is Everywhere. For the full audio and complete ebook, please see the link below. I wish you well on your own unique journey of healing, soul tending, and self-realization.